There is an absence in the majority of commonly accessed books on the occult and esoteric. This lapse is that of 20th century occultist Dion Fortune. The works of Violet Mary Firth, more commonly known by her alias and pen name Dion Fortune, seem to be perpetually overlooked in the occult community and are seldom referenced in the texts of other occultists. Regardless of this, her studies have had a major influence on occultism in study, application, and reference, the most notably by making the occult accessible to the common masses, not only in her own novelizations, but by her influences on prolific fantasy novelists, such as Marion Zimmer Bradley and Mercedes Lackey, and these many texts hold numerous quantities of relevant data to the field. Why then this omission? And what sort of relevance might Fortune's studies yield to the field of occult studies today? Certainly her works hold remarkable theories on the unseen world, and it is clear that others have applied her works to their own. There is merit in her studies, and a wealth of wise observations that should no longer be overlooked in this fashion. In this entry, we will examine Fortune's works of non-fiction, and look at her novels, and their profound impact on the realm of occultism and magic at a later time. Fortune's personal life, naturally enough, played a large role in her explorations of the occult. She was born to the name Violet Mary Firth in Llandudno, Wales, in December 1890, to parents who were strong advocates of Christian Science. She later adopted the name Dion Fortune from her family's motto, Deo non fortuna, translated as God, not fate. In her youth, she showed a penchant for daydreaming that quickly became similar to focused meditation, strengthening her mind and imagination in a way her later teaching would deem fundamental to occult practice. Age 20 saw her working at a school where she claimed to have been confronted for the first time with a psychic attack by her employer, a woman who knew an Indian method of directing energy toward a targeted person. While this attack devastated Fortune physically and mentally, it also served as an example of the psychic attacks discussed at great length in her book, Psychic Self-Defense, which will also be detailed further later on. She eventually became a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, but eventually separated to form her own group, the Community of the Inner Light. This group lives on as the Society of the Inner Light, and has seen a number of noted occultists as students and members. Gareth Knight is a notable example, both for his own studies and his biographies of Fortune. At the age of 55, Fortune was diagnosed with leukemia and died soon after in January of 1946 at London's Middlesex Hospital. The Society of the Inner Light was likely one of the most important creations of Fortune's life. Not only has the Society continued to push forward her ideals and methods of occult training, but it has kept her books and articles in publication. The contact information is readily available in the back of her books, as well as online. They continue to provide further information for sincere inquirers. Members must, as Fortune advocated, be mature adults at a minimum of 25 years of age, with few exceptions. They cannot be taking any medications that can affect psychic facilities, which Fortune considered a sign of the dark path of occultism to artificially open channels that rightly need proper training and command of the senses. The fee requested for admittance into the training program of the Society, which can be taken without full membership, is nominal, and paid only once, presumably for the cost of supplies and postage. Information, even through the postal system, comes at no cost at all. These are all in accordance with the ideals faithfully set down by Fortune in various texts, and apparently well adhered to even all these years following her death. According to Fortune, there are common methods by which a given person might encounter the unseen world, two varieties of which are hauntings and vampirism, the latter generally denoting a telepathic rapport and draining rather than the ingestion of blood. But Fortune herself admits that there can be other sources for symptoms common with occult encounters and states. Needless to say, the possibility of some natural, material explanation must never be ignored, even in cases where the supernatural element appears most obvious. Dion Fortune, Psychic Self-Defense. This is a pleasant reality check from a person whose works focus on those same supernatural elements and demands a certain amount of respect. Fortune readily admits that non-occult possibilities be considered and investigated first. But, naturally enough, she also addresses powers that are not necessarily measurable, stating, "We find that there are certain powers in our minds, not in the least rare or supernatural, for we are using them every day, which, if developed and consciously directed, will produce the most remarkable results. Dion Fortune, Training and Work of an Initiate. She focuses at great length on the powers of the mind and what that training can do in a learned individual, the height of which she deems an adept. Even for these higher levels of experience, she professes that dangers are still inherent in exploration of the occult. She states that an occultist traveling out of body, on what many refer to as the astral plane, who encounters unpleasantness on the astral plane, or if his subtle body is seen and struck or shot at, the physical body will show the marks. Dion Fortune, Psychic Self-Defense. This could be the explanation for some of the hauntings she describes, being a person traveling in a spiritual body to other places than where his physical body lies. This is a way a person might encounter the supernatural unexpectedly, and generally in a less offensive way than some of the other experiences Fortune details. This segues directly into the occult as Fortune's works define it. What is it that occultism means, then? More, are occultism and esotericism the same? The terms have their own meanings, for occult means hidden, while esoteric means for the few. Esoteric science begins where exoteric science ends. Dion Fortune, Esoteric Orders and Their Work. What is its role, though, and who then determines what falls under the category? According to Fortune, there are states of consciousness which transcend the normal, and when these states prevail, we can discern forms of existence with which normally we have no contact. Dion Fortune, Sane Occultism. The practice of the occult, then, is the expansion of the mind. However, what today is considered commonplace was once believed to be supernatural, and the supernatural of today might yet be moved to what is considered legitimate science. Fortune seems to advocate such study and a scientific approach, insisting that mathematics, reading, and writing were once considered to be elitist examples of occult studies. But then, she also approaches it from the perspective of a practitioner. Occultism is more than a science or philosophy. It is a religion, and its secrets are not penetrated by study alone, but by dedication. Dion Fortune, Sane Occultism. While she often approaches the occult in the form of a practitioner rather than with the objectivity of a researcher, her theories also provide an insider's perspective to a curious academic, and a well-established introduction to the study of the occult. Fortune has a great deal to say for the quester on the path of what she deems the mysteries, essentially the hidden learning of the occultists that have been passed through the centuries according to her teachings. This journey, she says, is more than a simple task, and is a life-altering decision. One of her introductory texts, Esoteric Orders and Their Work, explains, the path which leads to initiation is the way of life which enables a man to rise above the desires and limitations of his personality and live in his higher self. A man sets foot upon the path immediately he desires to do so. While Fortune's own approach to the occult stems primarily from Christian and Kabbalistic sources, she also acknowledges the validity of other traditions pertinent to the practitioner alone. She equates the major figures of religious traditions on the same level, inferring that Jesus Christ stands upon the same degree as the Manas Krishna and Osiris, as a master of masters upon his ray. Dion Fortune, Esoteric Orders and Their Work. There are lesser masters in each area, too, who have progressed to the spiritual evolution of mankind, that which is sought in the practice of the occult and the psychic sciences. From time to time we shall see some swift-footed soul draw ahead of the great army of mankind and push alone in the wilderness. For a period his path is solitary, but presently he catches up with the far-flung line of the scouts, and if able to give the password that proves him to be of their body, is given his place in the ranks of that adventurous company, a boundary rider of evolution. Dion Fortune, Esoteric Orders and Their Work. She advocates the path of light, the path of righteousness, as the occult path promoting the spiritual evolution of humanity. Those who move away from the common masses, reaching further to bring those lessons back, are the masters and adepts of the esoteric. Several of Fortune's works deal with preparing a person for the lessons that can be learned without the aid of a mentor, an adept in the case of this field. As her system states that advancements in the esoteric world advance the spiritual evolution of mankind, she naturally advocates the learning of the occult for any interested. Generally speaking, there is no reason why everybody who is drawn towards the study of occultism should not make a beginning with the use of these powers. Dion Fortune, Training and Work of an Initiate. Her books provide a starting point for this, on the basis of the idea that a student should do all possible to prepare in the early stages before trying to perform advanced occult works or seek a master. The elementary education that can be mastered without such aid should be sought first, for this neophyte should come as completely equipped as exoteric studies can make him. Dion Fortune, Training and Work of an Initiate. In several sources, she even advocates a thorough understanding, if not mastery, of science and worldly subjects, which is again a reference to the idea that exoteric possibilities should not be ignored in favor of the supernatural. Fortune differentiates the paths for the seeker by more than just light and darkness, or, put simplistically, good and bad. The student himself can be either a mystic or occultist, with Fortune herself clearly favoring the latter. And there are two paths to the innermost: the way of the mystic, which is the way of devotion and meditation, a solitary and subjective path, and the way of the occultist, which is the way of the intellect, of concentration, and of the trained will. Dion Fortune, Esoteric Orders and Their Work. The former is solitary, with the other often more group-oriented, and the occultist seems to be described as a way of study rather than simply turning inward and doing what one believes to be best. Within the complexities of this is introduced the idea of reincarnation. A person cannot truly become an initiate, much less an adept, without 3 lives of dedication, and only then can the path Fortune speaks of be walked with great understanding. She also mentions, undoubtedly to dissuade discouragement, that every path must begin with a first step, and that everyone interested should take those first steps. She advocates this beginning, as well as showing preference in her work for the occultist, as opposed to the mystic. Evolution is at the heart of Fortune's works, the evolution of the soul and growth of mankind in the spiritual sense rather than the biological. This is what differentiates the path of light, or the right-hand path, from its opposite. The right-hand path seeks to promote and advance this idea of evolution, while the left-hand path would undermine it. Within each path, though, there are variations, for no one particular route can be laid down as the true path or system by which every man must come. The ways to God are as many as the breaths of the sons of man. It is the directness or indirectness of the route that counts. Dion Fortune, Esoteric Orders and Their Work. She is also aware that some people might alter their path, and cautions the would-be student not to obey a teacher who is clearly doing wrong. The student has the right to judge what is or is not morally right, and should bear that in mind in times of uncertainty. Fortune insists, in Esoteric Orders and Their Work, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and him only shalt thou serve." The function of the teacher, initiator, fraternity, or order is to bring you to God, not to take the place of God and demand your loyalty. She clearly knows the fallibility of man, and does not confer godlike perfection to any teacher of the occult. She places all importance on the student, with instruction to trust one's own moral compass, and to follow the right-hand path and the progression of evolution, even should the master try to push toward the opposite. The left-hand path is the direct converse of the right-hand path. Instead of promoting evolution, it seeks to backtrack and use coarser but easier methods of occult application, often resulting in harm being done to others as a way to summon the power they believe to be bound in such strong emotion. The cautions to any student about clearly analyzing the morality of their research and practices are necessary, because the dark path can be inadvertently accessed by the inexperienced or misled. Black occultists may be divided into 2 classes: those who deliberately say to evil, "Be thou my good," and those who stray onto the left-hand path more or less unintentionally, and having got there, stay there, often deluding themselves. Dion Fortune, Sane Occultism. The parable of the solitary scout again applies, and it can be easier to go in the opposite direction, backwards, over the ground already well traveled by the masses of humanity. Once finding this easier path, it can also be tempting to remain there, with baser powers and understandings that were more readily available and in greater quantity. Fortune addresses the consequences of this, and people she identifies as occult police who remedy the wrongs they have done. They might equally be known as astral ambulance workers, for their task is twofold. In those cases which require their intervention for the safeguarding of society usually result in psychic casualties on both sides. Their task is to combat black occultism and deal occultly with those evils which arise from the abuse of esoteric knowledge. Dion Fortune, Sane Occultism. This remedy, and the idea of occult-based magical guardians of humanity, has an understandably large appeal in the fantasy genre, particularly as a hero. The appealing notion that there is someone to remedy all of the evils brought about by matters beyond normal human understanding is a comforting one, and thus found regularly in modern texts. Today, it can be something of a trial to find secondary sources referencing Fortune. Examination of books on the esoteric, whether academic or New Age in nature, seldom offer information on the occultist, or, if one does, it is rarely more than a passing reference or two. Nevertheless, the work she practiced and ideas she advocated can be found with only a bit of searching in some unexpected areas, namely, the modern fantasy genre. Her influence can be discerned in today's influential fantasy writers, such as Marion Zimmer Bradley and Mercedes Lackey. Both, in fact, have referenced her directly, and with far more deference than granted by these authors to other occultists of Fortune's time. Bradley refers to her as a pinnacle of the age of reason. On one side, Darwin and Freud, proclaiming nothing more than a computer made out of meat, assembled by random chance and a blind watchmaker. And on the other side, Mathers, Case, Waite, Fortune, Crowley, fighting against the rationalist cold equations, working desperately in a world that thought them ludicrous eccentrics or even criminal lunatics. Marion Zimmer Bradley, Heartlight. Lackey makes free use of Fortune's idea of the cult police, terming them guardians, best represented by one heroine who is one herself, and who describes what she fights as stuff like Dion Fortune hinted about. Works like this, or so my grandmother told me. Anything or anyone who makes a living exploiting others psychically, or hurting or killing them, I either take care of them when I see them and I'm ready and they're not, or I stand around and let them come for me on their terms. Mercedes Lackey, Children of the Night. Direct references by two best-selling novelists support the notion that Fortune's influence in the world of occultism has not entirely dissolved, and the worlds they have created in their novels display that further. Bradley's most thorough and exemplary champion of the light is Colin McLaren, protagonist of Heartlight and frequent assistant in other books of the Light series. He is directly referred to as an adept on the right-hand path dedicated to the great work of transformation, and his missions throughout the incarnation described in the novel parallel Fortune's definitions of such a person. His goal, much as in Fortune's occult police, is to ensure that those who have no desire for the knowledge of the esoteric never need face what they are unprepared for, as well as guiding newcomers to his path. Colin stands firm by his beliefs with a strong statement to that effect. The great mass of humanity has the right to not be troubled by forces outside the scope of their daily lives, or manipulated by forces they have no way of resisting. When I find someone interfering in people's lives with black magic, it's my duty to stop them if I can. It's my job. Marion Zimmer Bradley, Heartlight. This is very much akin to a responsible keeper of such lore as Fortune describes in her works. Even more compelling, the notion of spiritual evolution is found relevant in Bradley's novel too, first in the idea of mankind's spiritual growth, and second in the need for reincarnation to attain true spiritual enlightenment. There is a roughness implied in man's spiritual evolution, for spiritual evolution was as harsh and ruthless as the physical evolution practiced by nature. Nations were sacrificed, whole races blotted out, in spirit's quest for the light. Marion Zimmer Bradley, Heartlight. This is a logical conclusion when confronted with such an idea as the evolution of spirit. It is no easy matter, and is a lesson that must be learned difficultly and thoroughly. So too is the personal spiritual evolution of a single man ripe with difficulty, such as Bradley's fictional Colin McLaren. Indeed, he was first introduced much earlier in The Fall of Atlantis as the Atlantean priest Rivetta, who allowed his pride to nearly destroy an entire civilization, a fact Colin himself became aware of during the climax of Heartlight. Since that time, the culmination of countless lifetimes of spiritual work have been his atonement for that crime. Truly, the forgetfulness of those on the path brought with them into life was a great mercy. How could he ever have lived with the intimate knowledge of that great crime? He had labored 1,000 lifetimes since to atone for what he had done. But at that moment, Colin did not feel it was enough. Marion Zimmer Bradley, Heartlight. The penalty he has paid was for accepting and using the left-hand path, applying his magical knowledge for his own gain, and, as Fortune's work implies, he was properly punished for the act. As much as humanity as a whole evolves in the spiritual fashion, so does the single person. Lackey's employment of Fortune's ideas seem equally blatant in her novels. She herself cites a Christian idiom commonly found in Fortune's works: "When the student is ready, a teacher will find her." Mercedes Lackey, Phoenix and Ashes. This can be construed as the follower of the path learning all that can be learned without a master before one shows himself, lest time be wasted on learning elementary aspects at a time when university learning should occur. Another statement reflected by Fortune. Even the methodology of Magick parallels some of Fortune's own ideas. Imagination, that was the key. Whatever she could imagine, if she could do it well enough and believe in it, she could see. Intellect ruled the Middle Earth, which lay between the spheres of the light path and the spheres of the dark. Mercedes Lackey, Phoenix and Ashes. Imagination, controlled by the will, is a key element in Fortune's ideas of actual magical practice. Lackey furthers this with a direct comparison to the medieval ideas of alchemy, which can be easily imagined as a direct precursor to what Fortune explored. Alchemy, as it seems frequently perceived in the occult world, had never been about finding ways to change base metal into gold. That particular transmutation itself was merely a philosophical expression for the evolution and maturation of a human soul. Mercedes Lackey, Phoenix and Ashes. Again, the idea of spiritual evolution is seen. Fortune's works are well applied in these and other works by both Lackey and Bradley, despite her presence as somewhat under the radar in official occult publications. Dion Fortune developed numerous documents detailing her works and studies, most, if not all of which, are still in publication today. Her presence can be hard to detect in studies of the esoteric and famous occultists, particularly compared to such notorious and self-proclaimed creatures of evil as Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey. Nevertheless, her works have created great influences in the modern world as far as the esoteric goes. While not particularly well researched beyond her own followers, her contribution was vast, and should be considered among the great contributors in the sphere of mysticism and the occult.